And we're back with episode 5 of season 1 of
Yes.
Exploring Faith, Pursuing Grace. Kyler and I, like, this is 30 seconds ago, but here we are. Still, to you, it's a week. We just traveled in time. And if you just, maybe you're like, maybe you are splurging and like listening to all the episodes at one time or binging and listening to all the episodes at once, then you just heard Kyler's story. And now we're going to talk about
Mm.
why his story matters and how it manifests itself in relationships between Christians of various denominations, whether it's denominations within the Church of Christ, such as we have a non institutional Church of Christ person on the other end of the microphone, and here I am, institutional Church of Christ denomination. We're now working together. But not only that, we are also willing to work with people from Baptist backgrounds or community churches, which, as Kyler so beautifully said a while ago, are Southern Baptist churches in disguise. You know what they're actually? They're Southern Baptist churches who don't want to be associated with the Southern Baptist Convention, but who also don't want to forfeit the benefits of being part
Yes.
of the Southern Baptist Convention. Okay, enough throwing stones in glass houses. Let's get back into this. Kyler, welcome back to the program.
Mm. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, how are you doing today? Are you still doing as good as you were last week? Because
I was. I
okay.
am. I'm. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So at the tail end of the last program, you were talking about how you've started to visit different churches. How has that experience been for you?
It's been very eye-opening.
Okay.
Just kind of on a more emotional level. As I mentioned in the previous program, I have been a musician my entire life.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because, I've played piano since I was 4. I played percussion instruments since I was in the 6th grade. So music is just has been throughout my life is just something that's just a huge part of my life.
Yeah.
Marching band throughout middle and high school, and it's
Wow.
always hard because you hear even your friends at school that are going to churches and oh, our praise band is so great, and we're looking for a new vocalist or a new drummer or all of this thing, and I'm sitting here like, but I've got the talent. I have the talent. I would love to do that. Like, I even had a point where I was like, my dream is to play piano at a church service, even if it's only once and then I have to beg for forgiveness, but I still want
Oh,
to do
really?
it at least one time.
Wow.
And so kind of being able to experience worship in a new way, which, okay, 4-part harmony, especially when you're at a congregation with 350 individuals, is absolutely stunning.
Oh, for sure.
There's nothing cooler than hearing 4-part harmony, especially with a majority of those who understand and can sing pretty well.
Yeah, we're
Um,
probably
it,
in the
it
choir at
is,
FC or something. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it is an absolutely gorgeous experience, but experiencing worship from a different perspective and actually having a praise band and feeling some of that music, which, I mean, let's face it, a lot of worship has an emotional tie to it.
Yeah.
And to be able to feel that has been very eye-opening. And that's just on an emotional level. You listen to some other on a more spiritual or doctrinal level, you kind of get concerned. You're like, if you're going to go to a different congregation, are you going to get, or even different, another trigger word here, denomination, are you going to hear, such solid theological teaching? Are you going to hear a message that's a mile wide and an inch deep? Like, where are you at on that spectrum? And everywhere that we've, or the times that we've visited since has had very deep teaching involved, and it's been very eye-opening for me. And then this is more on a physical level too. I'm not, when I'm visiting, I'm not serving in the AV room, or I'm not leading singing, or I'm not up in the pulpit actually preaching. So I'm actually able to
Yeah.
fully devote myself to what the message is being brought. So I mean, it's been great.
Oh, wow. I There was one thing I was going to say and I couldn't get my notepad out in time to write it down. So one thing you mentioned was the emotional level of the music. I want to speak to that for a second. And
Yeah,
this is a little bit of an instrumental music thing, but I guess it's important in an ecumenical podcast. So
yeah, absolutely.
Ephesians 5:19, Colossians 3:16. Everybody knows these passages within the Church of Christ. Well, speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. Have you ever heard somebody say, it says singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord, not in your harp to the Lord? You ever heard
Oh
somebody say
yeah.
that? Okay.
Oh,
Here's the
I
thing
have.
though. I think you said this perfectly, just so casually. You just mentioned it. Oh, I just remember what it was. Hang on. Let's see. Okay, so you just said it kind of casually, but anybody who plays music and gets beyond do re mi fa sol la ti do, they get
Mhm.
beyond uh beginning piano for little fingers. Did you have that book when you were a
Mhm.
kid? Yeah.
Yes.
I had that book. Here we go up a road to a birthday party. Yeah.
Hmm.
If you get past that stuff and you start learning, especially, in jazz or blues or even other traditions, improvisation and things like that,
Hmm.
or maybe you're playing with a big band and everybody is just firing on all cylinders,
Yes. Yes.
that is so spiritual. You know,
Absolutely.
go watch a BB King live performance or Stevie Ray Vaughan or maybe even like a metal guitarist like Steve Vai or somebody, and you watch them play
Mhm.
or you listen to someone like that sing, and you're like, they're playing in their heart. They're not
Yes.
playing. It's not the about the instrument. That's
No,
that's that
no, the instrument has nothing to do with it at that
it's
point.
a medium for something that's going on deep within their soul. And I think that's why David was able to drive out Saul's evil spirits through the harp. It wasn't anything about the harp. It was about the Holy Spirit working through David to produce that beautiful music that could
Mhm.
affect an actual change in the real world, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
have you ever watched the movie Soul?
No, well, I watched it. I wasn't paying too much attention to it because I'm not a big movie person.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, I have watched it. But yeah, the whole idea of music and that, like the role that music plays in that, it is incredible.
Yeah, well, the whole idea is that everybody has their thing, like their thing that they
Hmm.
do. And this like one guy, he
Hmm.
spins a sign outside a store. But when he's spinning the sign,
Yeah.
it's like he goes outside of himself. He goes into that
Yep.
realm. And
Mhm.
I forgot what the other people's things was, but the main character his is jazz piano. And when he's playing that piano, it shows him like go out of his own body and
Mhm.
he's kind of in this other world inside the movie. And so that's the whole idea, though. And I thought it captured it perfectly is that many musicians are playing from the heart, not the harp,
Yes.
you know? Yeah.
Yep. I've even had, sometimes going to piano mainly.
Yeah.
And I remember this is it still gives me goosebumps to think about it. Um, I don't know if you know the song Wonderful Merciful Savior.
Yeah. Wonderful,
Uh,
merciful Savior.
Absolutely. And
Yeah. Yeah.
the alto part in the chorus of that and the moving alto part in the chorus of that. And I somehow translated that onto the piano.
Yeah.
And I went and heard a different version of it that I guess was on Apple Music or whatever at the time was that I was listening to it. And it was right after that moving part of the chorus, and like as the chorus was kind of coming to its close, and it didn't resolve, but there was a point where it resolved in a minor chord, and then there was just this little piano riff, and it was in the background, and I could still play the piano riff, and it just like that. I don't know, it was just that particular part of it just completely changed the whole song for me. And I
Wow.
went onto that piano and I learned that piano riff, and then from that point on, I almost felt like that same type of experience. I
Yeah.
would be playing, and then it just like it was more spiritual than it was for me physical or even emotional at that point. Like there was like it was there, the spirit was there. And it was really cool to kind of lean into that and learn that. Now, granted, at that point in time, I did kind of sort of feel a little guilty about that
Well,
because now you're kind of worshiping with an instrument, but it was really cool.
let's talk about that a little bit because you mentioned that from the time as a young kid, you're like, I want to play a piano in a church one day. And you
Mm.
knew though, you probably felt guilty about even having that desire, right?
Yeah,
But the
yeah.
way I kind of see it is like this. The deeper feeling, I want to go play piano with the church. The reaction feeling, one step above that, is the guilt. But your deeper
Hmm.
self, the truer self, the self that made in the image of God, knew
Hmm.
inherently that there's beauty in music.
Yes.
There's this author that I've fallen in love with, and I've read uh, several of his books at this point. Actually, we have a podcast interview scheduled with him August 3rd. His name's John Philip Newell. And he talks a lot about the Celtic tradition in Christianity. And you're going to love that
Hmm.
podcast whenever we get around to it. But uh, that's one thing that he mentions is we have this tendency to say, "Oh, I messed up. Sorry, that's just human nature." Or, "Oh, he lies, cheats, and steals. Human nature." He's like, "What? That's not human nature. Human nature is made in the image of God. God looks at this and says
Mhm.
it is very good." What that is that's
Yes.
the false self. Yeah, that's something else, sin or the flesh or whatever you want to call it. But at the very deepest level, we're created good. And so there's these things that we know that have to be true. They just have to be true. But the all these layers, the house of cards that you talked about in the last episode, this fortress that we've
Mm.
constructed for ourselves, it doesn't let us be our true selves. And
Yeah.
yeah, but I think it's interesting though that you knew it to be true before you ever actually mentally came to the right conclusions or whatever, or worked it out in your brain. Um, One other thing I was going to mention is you mentioned how in visiting churches, you never know what you're going to get. Is the music going to
Right.
be terrible? Is the preaching going to be super shallow? Am I walking into a prosperity gospel church that I don't even know
Right.
it? Am I walking into an end times cult? Like this place is called the Ark. Like, are they, are they thinking they're going to be the only ones to survive some kind of eschatological catastrophe right around the corner? Like, who
Yeah.
knows what's going to happen? And so, uh, have you had an experience? Because I have. I've had this experience where you're like, oh wait, people outside the Church of Christ just might be saved. Let me go talk to them. And then you find somebody who is even more radical and legalistic or extreme. Way even maybe way more than what you experienced in the Church of Christ. Have you had that experience yet?
Mm, I haven't had that experience in person yet,
Okay, yeah, I gotcha.
but I've listened to the age of Facebook and TikTok and all the reels and everything that come across your Facebook page anymore.
Yeah,
I've listened to a lot of individuals who are so deeply reformed. And at first, because I'm discovering grace,
yeah,
I'm just discovering grace. And of course, one of the major points in the reformed camp, however far down the spectrum you go, is grace. And so I'm hearing these things and I'm like, oh my goodness, like this is not legalistic at all. Like I'm coming out of this idea of legalism from the perspective of works-based salvation, or like we have to
right.
earn our way in heaven, to this idea that we can't do that at all. Like grace just catches up to us. Like you say that all the time. Like we try to pursue grace and it's just going to fall by the way. Our pursuit's going to fall by the wayside, and grace is just going to catch up to us in one way or shape or form or the other.
Yeah,
Um, but listening to those guys, I was like, oh, this is great. Like, oh my goodness, they're talking grace. And was it Vadi Bosham and all these guys, the crazy popular theologians, at least in the Reformed camp. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And then you kind of come to realize, oh, they're also kind of legalistic, but from a completely different perspective. And then you
yeah.
start to realize legalism is much deeper than just a
Whether or not you worship with an
restoration.
instrument.
Yeah, yeah. Like,
Well,
like legalism is much more a restoration movement. And then you start like, oh wait, that's what Galatians was written about. Oh
yeah.
wait, that's what was happening in Acts. And you're like, oh man, this is a this is a problem that reaches all the way back to the first church. I mean, it's incredible to see that.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people who come from like an independent fundamentalist Baptist church background have experiences like that. I'm not saying that every
Sure.
church with that name is like this or not, but there's some people I follow on social media who that was their background, and it seems strikingly similar. Brian
Right.
McLaren, who's going to be on the program next week, he comes from the Plymouth Brethren black background.
Ah, yes.
You know this
I've
group.
heard about.
Well, they were basically the UK's version of the Restoration Movement. So there's a lot of
Got it.
similarities. In fact, what's hilarious, and you're going to hear this next week, and I'm kind of, or actually, they've already heard this, so they're not going to worry about it. It's going to be spoiled for you, particular, but for the people that are listening, they've already heard this. They don't call their their week long preaching, singing meetings revivals because they don't need to be revived. They call them special meetings.
Mm,
Instead of
okay.
we call them gospel meetings, of course, but
Gospel meetings. Yep.
yeah, but
Yep.
they wouldn't call them revivals either because they didn't need to be revived. They were the one true church. So, anyways, but that's one thing that I noticed when I was moving from the Church of Christ, sort of, to exploring all these other traditions and heritages. I was like, wait a minute, some of these people might be, on the outside, less legalistic than we are, but you get
Mm,
any depth at all, and you realize that they're just
yeah,
as exclusive. It just has different, there's just an electric guitar on stage here or
right,
something.
right,
And a lot of their
right.
theology is actually very, uh, uh, you know, very perplexing.
Yeah,
And one of the things you realize is a lot of these speakers that you mentioned a while ago, you mentioned Rob Bell, for instance. It's not like he came
yeah.
out of a backwoods one cup Church of Christ congregation. He was a pastor of a mega
Mhm.
church when he,
Yes.
deconstructed, right? And so
Mhm.
there's all different kinds of expressions of faith, and there's all different kinds of expressions of legalism or fundamentalism or whatever you want to call it that you bump up against. So I can imagine that maybe in like the first or second visit to some of these churches, it's like, oh, this is cool, oh, this is good, and then you like get into
Mhm.
the new members class, and you're going, wait a second here.
Wait a second.
I don't
Yep.
think I
Yeah.
believe that God predestined people to burn in hell forever. That doesn't right. That doesn't seem quite right. Yeah. So yeah,
Yep.
keep going with some of this. Tell us more about your experience in visiting some of these churches.
I think it was, for me, just the experience of visiting these churches was I mean, it was for me, it was the ecumenical mindset behind of it.
Yeah.
Like we had talked in the prior program was how my study on Acts to the young adults of the congregation that I was attending, um, that study was really big for me in realizing just how broad the brethren and the quote church, actually the ecclesia in Acts, how broad that term was meant to be, how far that net was actually cast. And it's not just this small sliver of people who might just have been bestowed the spiritual gift of being able to discern the Bible through command, example, and necessary inference.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a huge net. And so that has been, I think, the biggest, I don't want to say saving grace, but I mean, it's been the biggest foundation for me and, of course, my wife to be able to kind of visit some of these places and keep an open mind that way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's to kind of how I like to talk about it when it comes to an ecumenical mindset is a lot of the times, and this isn't just Church of Christ exclusive. This is really any, you could say fundamentalist or legalist, but also really just any even evangelical camp is, you have, if you're trying to start from here and you're saying, okay, well, we have to give up this, and you have to give up that, and we have to give up this, and you have to give up that, and if for those who are just listening, I'm starting at the top, and you're kind of inching downward until we finally find the least common denominator. Like that is a way of, you're saying you have to give up all of this, and I have to give up all of this to even get to a point where we even agree.
Yeah.
But ecumenism and like an ecumenical mindset starts at the bottom. It starts at a foundation and says, okay, what are our tier one, the things that we know and we believe and we just have set in stone. And that is Jesus Christ came, he died and was resurrected. Boom.
That's
There's
it.
our foundation.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the gospel. Here's the gospel. Let's kind of build off of the gospel. And that's how I think in my mind, like that's how you come up across an ecumenical mindset.
Yeah. That's called the core gospel heresy in the Churches of Christ. Have you ever heard that term?
Mm,
They call it the
I
core
have.
gospel heresy. Yeah. How about that? There you go. Strike one. That's it's beautifully stated though,
They
because
might not have me on again.
yeah, because when you talk about compromise, that you're
Hmm.
it's already kind of a dirty word, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
but what we have to learn to do is accept the fact, yeah, that we both believe that Jesus Christ came, died, was resurrected the third day, etc. Ascended to sit at the right hand of God, sent the Holy Spirit, however much or little you want to emphasize there. We agree on that, the gospel story, basically, that Jesus is the fulfillment of the promises made to Israel, etc., etc., etc. But how we express that in a local congregation, whether it's through weekly communion, whether it's through a cappella music or instrumental music, like you don't start at that stuff. If
Right.
you start at that stuff, you're gonna find a million reasons to disagree and to have division. If you start at the bottom, you have one major reason why we should stick together. And
Yes.
I think another point to what you're saying is whenever Paul wrote the letter to the Roman church, he wasn't writing to this group that met in a building on 4th Street in Rome, where they all met in the same place. He's writing to a bunch
Mhm.
of satellite churches that are scattered all
Yeah.
around the city of Rome, the house church meeting with Priscilla and Aquila. And
Hmm.
who else knows what churches were within that vicinity? But yeah, churches all around, or like the churches in Galatia. There's a lot of churches involved in these letters. It's not just one church. Like whenever we would talk about these things in Bible class growing up, I pictured like one group of people, but it's different groups
Yeah.
of people. And these different groups of
Yeah.
people can have different expressions of their faith. Romans 14, whether they're keeping one day above the other, whether keeping every day, including Sunday, is the same,
Hmm.
whether they're eating meats or not eating meats, whether they're Jewish or Gentiles or a mixture of both. Like these are churches in fellowship with each other who find unity not despite their diversity, but because of their diversity.
Because of their drive. Yeah, absolutely. I
And
mean,
this,
the Corinthian
excuse me,
church, the
yeah,
church in Corinth. I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard it said, and it actually means so much now. Is for the grace of God to be bestowed on the Corinthian church. I mean, geographically speaking, I mean, kind of where Corinth is. It's in an isthmus, like right by an isthmus, and there's the two bay. I mean, it's a commerce town. I
right,
mean, there's so much, not just people, but I mean, you're looking at filth, and you're looking at moral filth, and you're looking at physical filth and emotional filth, and like all this. But like the church, yeah, there's two whole books, two really dense letters sent from Paul because of some of the issues that they were having, but
yeah.
they were a live church. They weren't dead. They
He,
weren't lukewarm. They were alive. And to understand that perspective and to think that like just kind of to draw a comparison is like all of the epistles, especially Corinthians, I mean, they were all written that had some type of pleasantry at the beginning from Paul, except for Galatians.
hmm.
In Galatians, Paul didn't have a pleasantry at the beginning. I mean, he just went straight into, hey guys, I'm astonished. And to think of this type of mentality is like, I mean, yeah, we have all these different mentalities, all these different backgrounds. There's a lot of sin, whatever, however you want to define sin, but, there's a lot of sin in this church. There's a lot of worldliness in this church, but at the same time, you guys are alive and I'm thankful for it. And kind of understanding that perspective, you're like, well, okay, now I really have to slow my roll and realize that maybe I'm not the only one that's right.
Yeah, exactly. I'm having trouble finding this quotation, just so as quickly as I'd like to. But there's a quote in my paper that I wrote called "In Opinions, Liberty," that is it's on that Gumroad place that Kyler mentioned a while ago. danielcrogers.gumroad.com. It's a free thing you can download. It's just a PDF. And he talks about in there, and if it's not in there, it's somewhere else, and I'll find it for you. Just message me and I can get you this quotation, where he says that there actually needs to be different sects of Christians.
Mm,
There has to be.
mm-hmm.
And it's not because people are going to be stubborn and not want to conform or whatever. It's just because people have different personalities, different talents, different preferences. I don't prefer the more liturgical kind of service, you know,
Sure.
but there are people that do. Which, if we
Mm-hmm.
talked about what I preferred, probably wouldn't be very encouraging to people because it would involve a kayak and a campfire, and
Mm,
I would lose my job. Not that
yeah.
what I would say would be offensive, but that the church as it is now would cease to exist. So that wouldn't be great. We'd sell our building and whatnot, but that's a story for another day.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so there has to be different expressions of Christianity, and it's not that this classic question: why are there so many churches? There are so many churches because we have demanded that people conform to our view of Christianity
Yes.
and our
Yes.
expression of Christianity. There's only one
Yes.
church, actually. We got that part right. There's only one church. There's only one body of Christ. And there doesn't have to be these divisions. The Methodist Church and the Baptist Church don't have to sell their buildings and go into one community. They would be miserable if they did that. At
Mm-hmm.
least on this side of heaven, right? They've got to have their
Uh,
own personal expressions of their faith. That's a beautiful thing, not a dirty thing. And
right.
the faster we learn to work together and to express unity despite those differences, the faster the world will
Mhm.
come to know who Jesus is. Because that's the thing that Jesus said would draw people to the Father. Obviously, he said,
Mhm.
"When I'm lifted up from the earth, I'll draw people to myself." I understand that, but what I mean is John 17. He said that's the debater thing going on here, right?
Yeah,
I'm already thinking
yeah.
about what the comments are going to say. No, but Jesus
Yep.
says in John 17 that I pray that they'll be one, so that they may know you and that you may be glorified. That's how
Yeah.
God is glorified, and that's how the world comes to know the Father when Christians are one. By making
Yes.
these issues the thing that divide us, we are actively working against the prayer of Jesus before he died.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Ooh. Ooh. Yep. There's kind of to go back to this illustration that we were talking about, versus do we build up from the top or we build up from the bottom? And this is kind of going to kind of pull from my two-part series that I did last year. So if you haven't listened to the first half of this program, definitely go do that. I preached a two-part sermon on relationship, not religion, which really just encapsulated a year long's worth of deconstruction for me. And it was really
Yeah.
realizing that religion shouldn't be transactional. It should be much more relationship based and transformational because we realize the grace of God and building our faith upon that rather than building our faith upon what we think we're doing in order to earn salvation, whether that be within four walls or without four walls. And a lot of it has to do with worship and what our idea of worship is. And I referenced Romans 12:1 and 2 so much because Romans, present your bodies as a living sacrifice. That right there, just kind of breaks down the idea that worship happens inside four walls of a congregation. Worship happens. Your body, your life is, to be lived in a way that's, that right there is your worship, is your life lived. But
Yeah.
um, a lot of that, based on are we living our lives out of transformation or are we living our lives out of transaction is really what I was trying to go with this. And as our faith based on transaction or transformation. And so when we're thinking of, starting from the top and we're having to compromise on certain things and they're having to compromise on certain things until we reach a portion of where we're at, these things that we're compromising on aren't necessarily heart matters as much as they are transactions. Well, this transaction doesn't match the transaction that I have, and this transaction doesn't match this transaction or tradition, I guess, if you want to call it that, until we get to a point of commonality. But at the point at the bottom, here's our heart, and our heart is in unity. And here's our tier one, the tier one issues, if you want to call them that, or the tier one things that we all agree on, and that's the gospel. And if we have a heart for the gospel, everything else at that point we can work with.
Yeah, I love how Ephesians 4 says that we have to endeavor to keep the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. Unity is something that's
Yes.
inherent within us as Christians that we have to keep. What we've done is we say, if we want to have unity, you have to come over here with me. No, unity already exists at the deepest level. It's up to us to keep
Yes.
it and maintain it and to recognize it. And one of the ways he says
Mhm.
that you have to do that, I think some versions say there in Ephesians chapter 4, is put up with each other or tolerate each other.
Yeah.
Like it's not
Yep.
necessarily an easy thing. And the thing about it is when you read the seven ones in Ephesians 4, which were considered by the leaders of the Restoration movement and other folks as the basis of unity, one Lord,
Mhm.
one faith, one baptism, etc. Those things are common. Now, this is going to blow some people's minds, maybe even my own. Those things are common to every Christian church.
Mhm.
And I know there's questions probably in people's minds about baptism, maybe even about hope,
Mhm.
because different churches have different expressions of eschatology, etc. Look, the one hope is that Jesus wins. That's the one hope is
Yeah.
that Jesus conquers the grave. And if we can agree on that, exactly how we understand all the points between A and Z and what that all looks like, that's okay. But we can all agree that Jesus is the one hope. We have the same hope. But you keep looking though at that Ephesians 4 passage. Everybody has that. Now we might understand different points of that, in various ways, but everybody has that core belief, that core foundation. And of course, it's all rooted in the central of those seven ones, and that is that there is one Lord. There's a reason why it's the middle one. It's actually, the whole thing is actually a
Mhm.
chiasm, different whole thing, but it's all rooted around the idea that we have one Lord. And because of that, we have one God and Father of all, and we're all part of one human family, which means that inherently, every single one of us has unity. And anything that we
Mhm.
do to break that unity up, regardless of our noble intentions, is a violent attack upon the body of Christ. It really
Yes.
is. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Wow. Well, okay. So basically what we're saying is go find the church of your choice. No, okay. But Kyler, we wish you well on your journey to find a church home. I think that's beautiful, and we look forward to updates. Just so you all know, towards the end of August, we are going to be co-interviewing together Jared Bias. He's going to be talking
Mhm.
about the book of Jonah and how to read the Bible. So that's going to be just awesome. And Kyler, of course, is a thank for picking him up. So you're going to be hearing from Kyler again, and perhaps even more because I've really enjoyed this.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
think you have too. Yeah, so we want to bring him back on, and if you want to bring him back on, then leave a comment. No, whatever. Just know, message him and encourage him, and tell him that you appreciate what he's done, appreciate how his testimony has affected you, and for some of those of you who are commenting saying that you love your Church of Christ tradition, as we both do, your heritage, but it's become painful for you to be there still. Perhaps Kyler's story will encourage you to move on if you need to. If you can stay, I
Mhm.
think that's awesome. I stay. I've committed to staying within the Church of Christ as long as I can, and hopefully that's a long, long time. But for those of you who can't do that, understand. And Kyler understands. He's been there, and
Yes.
maybe he
Mhm.
could even give you some tips if you needed on how to find a more grace-centered church and whatnot that you can be actively involved in and go to sleep at night, feeling pretty good about. But okay, that's going to be the end of episode 5 of season 1 of Exploring Faith, Pursuing Grace, which means we have 8 episodes to go this season. They're going to take a
Mm.
break. So it should be good. We got John Philip Newell coming up. We got Jared Bias coming up eventually, and then some other people who are still kind of working on getting scheduled and getting interviews set up. But there'll be 13 episodes regardless, even if it's just me and Kyler talking about, reviewing Dr. Seuss books or something. We'll figure out
Hey,
some
we'll do
content for you.
it.
Yeah.
What theology can we find in Dr. Seuss books, right?
Hey, the one about they have stars upon theirs. What's that? The star belly
Mm.
sneeches and the other,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's a book about how that's a book about how capitalism profits off of pitting us against each other to sell us stuff to make us feel better about ourselves to fit in with the in group, when really we should look at the original goodness within each of us. Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, we'll talk about that maybe one day. But anyways,
There we go.
yeah. But Kyler, do you have anything else you want to say before we close out here?
No, I again, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure to kind of come on and work alongside you. This ministry is huge. I know there's a lot of people out there that have the same thought processes as we do. Whether they say the quiet things out loud or they don't, there's a lot of these thoughts, and I'm really starting to see a movement in a different direction. I always talk about how the pendulum swings from one
Yeah.
extreme to the other, starting to see somewhat of a backswing, whether it be in the restoration movement or really just in churches in general, or the Christian church in general. And I think right now is a great time to lean into, like, the whole purpose of this program here, to lean into an ecumenical mindset and embrace each other, and really kind of go from that perspective. And yes, if you are a member of a restoration movement type church right now, you feel like you don't belong there, or you feel like you need some help kind of sifting through some of the thoughts that you have, please reach out to Daniel, reach out to myself. We will be more than happy to not just take you through our testimony and our dark nights of the soul, but also kind of, we can't give you the answers because heck, sometimes we don't even have the answers, but at least at one
Yeah.
point we could give you some tips and some tricks and kind of what has helped us, and maybe even some literature to just help you kind of guide you in a direction of a stronger faith. So
Or even
definitely.
help you find a more grace-centered Church of Christ, the Restoration Movement Church, Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. I mean, they're out there. They actually are out there, and they're out there in bigger numbers than you would expect, than perhaps you've been led to believe. But I mean, I can think of half a dozen within an hour and a half of me, and that's just off the top of my head. So I mean, they're definitely out there. You just have to have eyes to see and ears to hear, and go to the places that you were told not to go. It might be a good
There
place to
you
start.
go.
Yeah. Anyways, we'll bring this to a close here. If you want to contact me, you can always do that through my Facebook page or through my website, danielr.net. Be sure to follow the podcast. Be sure to subscribe. Give everything a like. Give it a positive review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever. That always helps us out and helps other people find us. But the best way that you can help this podcast out is by clicking the link, hitting copy, and inboxing it to a friend of yours who is in desperate need of it. Maybe they're going through a faith crisis. Maybe they left the Church of Christ and they don't go anywhere because they don't think that there is anywhere else that they can go. Send them this
Mhm.
podcast. Maybe this one. Maybe this one right here. Send it to them and have them listen to this episode and see that there are alternative ways of being Christian that are more grace centered and more centered around love. And we'd like everybody to have the peace and the joy that we have these days. It As I mentioned in my book, the baptism of the Spirit and the baptism of fire go hand in hand. But it is well
Mhm.
worth it when you get on the other side. So, everybody, thank you again for joining us. I'll be back next week for another episode of Exploring Faith, Pursuing Grace, and we'll see you then. God bless.